Hey everyone, on the Famous Brown show today, we're diving into a part of history that often gets overlooked. We're going to talk about slavery in the Americas, but not the narrative you might be most familiar with. We're going to explore the experiences of Native Americans who were subjected to various forms of enslavement and forced labor for centuries. This is a story that involves brutal conquest, complex power dynamics, and the resilience of indigenous people in the face of unimaginable hardship. It's a story that deserves to be told and understood, so let's get started. From the moment European colonizers set foot in the Americas, the enslavement of native peoples began. In the 1500s, the Spanish, British, French, and Portuguese all engaged in the capture and forced labor of indigenous populations. In what is now the United States, Native Americans, particularly in the Southeast and Southwest, were captured in wars, raids, or simply abducted outright. They were sold into slavery, traded like commodities, and forced to work in brutal conditions, on plantations, in mines, or as domestic servants. Some were even shipped across the Atlantic to the Caribbean or Europe, enduring horrific journeys in the process. As European settlements in North America grew in the 1600s and early 1700s, a full-blown trade in Native American slaves emerged. This was particularly prevalent in the American South, where European powers often exploited existing rivalries between different native nations. They encouraged tribes to capture and trade their enemies for European goods, including weapons, tools, and alcohol. This created a devastating cycle of violence and displacement, with tens of thousands of Native Americans enslaved and sold into forced labor. It's a dark and often overlooked chapter in the history of colonial America. While the transatlantic slave trade and the enslavement of Africans became the dominant forms of forced labor in the Americas, the exploitation of Native Americans continued in various forms. In places like California, Spanish missions relied heavily on native labor. While often described as a system of conversion and civilization, the reality for many indigenous people was harsh and coercive. They were subjected to forced labor, often under brutal conditions, and their traditional ways of life were systematically suppressed. The history of slavery in America becomes even more complex when we consider the role of Native Americans in relation to the enslavement of Africans. In the Southeast, some Native nations, particularly those who sought to assimilate into colonial society, adopted the practice of chattel slavery themselves. Tribes like the Cherokee Creek and Choctaw, under pressure to conform to European notions of civilization, acquired African slaves and participated in the system of chattel slavery. This complicated history challenges simplistic narratives and forces us to grapple with the nuanced ways in which power, race, and economics intersected in colonial America. So why is this history of Native American enslavement and forced labor not more widely known? There are a number of reasons. The sheer scale and legacy of African chattel slavery, with its lasting impacts like segregation and the civil rights movement, tend to dominate our understanding of slavery in America. Additionally, the devastation inflicted on native populations through disease, warfare, and displacement led to a significant decline in their numbers, making their stories harder to trace over time. And frankly, U.S. history, as it's been traditionally taught, has often marginalized or entirely erased indigenous voices and experiences. The history of slavery in the Americas is a long and complicated one, and it's essential that we acknowledge the experiences of all those who were subjected to its horrors. The enslavement and forced labor of Native Americans is a crucial, though often overlooked, part of that story. By understanding the full scope of this history, we gain a deeper understanding of the legacy of colonialism, the complexities of race and power, and the importance of amplifying marginalized voices. Thanks for joining me today, and don't forget to subscribe to Famous Brown YouTube channel for more explorations of the past.